Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables, and whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a café au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Welcome to the 252nd episode of the Simple Sophisticate. Yes, we are back with a new episode. It has been about 2 months since we've had a new episode. There have been some other shared favorite posts from the archives here and there in March and April and just last month. Actually, there were no in April. Don't worry, you didn't miss anything. And I'm excited to be back. I have been appreciative of listeners as I've wrapped up the preparation for my students' test. And we are back. And we are back in grand style because if you have already stopped by the blog as of yesterday, Sunday, the 19th of May, you know what has just begun. The first annual Simply Luxurious Life British Week. And it's off to a roaring start with 3 posts that have already been posted as of yesterday, and then this episode. So be sure to stop by if you haven't already. 1 giveaway has already been shared, and there are at least 2 more to come. And you'll also find a post about determining if maybe you are in fact an Anglophile and you didn't know it, or you knew you are and you just want to see what everyone else thinks as well. So I am excited to have this particular episode, as I usually am every week for the episodes. I mean, I think I comment on that every week, but I sincerely am each week because I'm bringing topics to you that have spoken to me, but I think would be of interest to you as listeners. Now, this particular episode isn't entirely aligned with the British Week. It doesn't you don't have to be an Anglophile to enjoy or appreciate it. In fact, that's why I chose it. It's inspired by a book that just came out last month in April called Late Bloomers. And I've talked about it a little bit on the blog in previous weeks, but I chose it partly because it just was released, number 1. Number 2, it has the word bloom in it, and it is spring, and it is, Britain's all about flowers, so somehow it ties in, right? But most importantly, I wanted to choose an episode that listeners were interested in, whether you were an Anglophile or not. Don't worry, this week's Petit Plaisir is a British find, a British treat, as I like to call them, that I think you will enjoy as a reader. And it's a book that I highly recommend if you haven't already read it, that just came out. So definitely stay tuned for that if you are interested in a new book to read and love Britain and the history of Britain. But this book is called Late Bloomers, The Power of Patience in a World Obsessed with Early Achievement. And it's by Rich Karlgaard. And I want to begin with a quote from the book, and I'll be sharing a lot of those today. But I think this gives a good overview of what you'll find and why I think this is fitting for the podcast. By necessity, we late bloomers are on a different, more challenging trajectory. As we travel through life, we encounter obstacles like the push for conformity, the oppression of groupthink, and the pains of self-doubt. But in all these challenges, we find our hidden treasure. We unearth our individuality. We see that a path to excellence, to reaching our true potential, is available to all of us. Within these challenges lies our true power, our covert talents and secret advantages as late bloomers. Now, unsurprisingly, this new book spoke to me and offered an abundance of reassurance and exhilaration. If the comments on my Instagram account a few weeks ago are any indication after I posted an excerpt from the book, I think you too will enjoy this book. And this post or episode will hopefully give you some insight into the detail that you'll find in it. Now, especially in America, we greatly celebrate or strive for and thus put pressure upon ourselves and either unconsciously or consciously put pressure on others as well to figure out our path early, to achieve success quickly. And when we don't, we make faulty assumptions about what we can contribute, which can erode our self-confidence or the self-confidence of others if we're putting that pressure on others. And it potentially can prevent the gem that resides within all of us to be discovered and then shared with the world, enabling us to find deep, lasting inner contentment. Carl Gard's new book is worth reading in depth from cover to cover as he delineates the obstacles that our culture currently needs to address with historical details, new studies, multiple anecdotal examples of how indeed the late bloomer simply needs time, patience, and awareness to blossom at their own time, as well as the most difficult support to refute findings, and that has to do with neurology and how the brain develops. So while I will encourage you to read the entire book, in today's episode, I wanted to share with you the characteristics that you might find yourself identifying with when it comes to being a late bloomer and not realizing the gift of opportunity that you have given yourself to enjoy the rest of your life. So let's get right into this list of 15 characteristics of a late bloomer, and then we'll talk about the gifts and benefits that you will receive and potentially will help you change the world to help everyone find more easily the state of contentment we're all seeking. Number 1, your curiosity is your fuel as a late bloomer. I'm going to be sharing a lot of quotes in this episode, and all of the quotes do come from the book titled Late Bloomers. Quote, by its very nature, curiosity demonstrates an independence of mind. Now, I love this because part of what I encourage here on the blog and the podcast and in my books, as well as my classroom, is that curiosity is a powerful force for good. It can really lead us to what we're searching for, even though we don't really know what we're searching for initially or entirely all the time or whatever. It just helps us not only to stay young, but also to stay revived and attain that contentment. So to keep on blooming throughout the entirety of our lives, we must forever remain curious. And that is what late bloomers possess, curiosity. Number 2, we are predisposed to be compassionate. Quote, in facing the ups and downs of life, many late bloomers gain a greater sense of compassion. They show greater reflective thinking, diminished ego-centeredness, and a deeper appreciation of others' challenges. End quote. Because late bloomers have faced struggles along the way, they have refrained from conforming at the expense of their social connections and acceptance into the group, they can more easily put themselves into the shoes of others and thus become more empathetic and be able to be more compassionate. Number 3, late bloomers develop better leadership skills. Due to elevated compassion, workers view leaders with this compassion component more favorably, and combined with, quote, authenticity and integrity, this trifecta of skills improves retention and employee performance, end quote. So another gift of being a late bloomer is that you often develop the skills necessary to be an effective, inspired, and productive leader. Number 4, resilience is developed and strengthened. Quote, when it comes to developing resilience, the regulation of emotions gives mature people an advantage over the young. There is a naturally learnable set of behaviors that contribute to resilience. Those are the behaviors that we gravitate to more and more as we age, end quote. And I think it's important to point out, and I think you probably already caught this, that these are learnable behaviors. Resilience is a skill. It's something we learn. So we're not just going to all of a sudden, because we're older, become more resilient. No, it's a journey. It's a choice. It's something that our curiosity leads us to and ultimately helps us get through those difficult times. And then through those experiences, we become more resilient. Thus, why people that are mature in age often have more resilience. They've had more opportunity to develop it. That's number 4. 5, emotion regulation is easier, which cultivates a calmer demeanor, which leads to more effectiveness and better relationships. Quote, our brains are driven to seek calmness as we age. Columbia University social psychologist Heidi Grant Halverson claims that calmness is central to happiness. Research has long established that calm leaders are more effective, end quote. Late bloomers naturally develop the skills necessary to find calmness if we choose to keep exploring, learning, listening, and observing what works and what does not. This is where our curiosity helps tremendously, leading us to the blooming stage of our lives that is authentic and unique to each of us. So that's number 5. Emotional regulation becomes a strength as we develop a desire to seek out calmness, which helps so many different arenas of our life. Number 6, a late bloomer has extensive insight. Quote, our insights are the result of us drawing on our full mental library of experience, patterns, and context, yielding an idea of extraordinary value. End quote. Carl Gard explains that, quote, the right hemisphere, the development of the left, is consistent with the development of the prefrontal cortex, which is not fully mature until the mid-20s. End quote. Now, due to this left side's difference in development compared to the right, it takes us time to see the connection of the awesome or unique events, sights, and experiences that we have had the opportunity to have, and then make sense of how we can utilize them in our unique way to create those ideas that just seem to be aha moments that seemingly come out of nowhere. When we're younger, it's harder for us to connect those dots, to have the left and the right brain communicate, as you'll find in his detailed research about neurology. And so it makes sense that we as late bloomers just need to keep persevering, keep exploring, keep learning, and eventually things start to connect. If we keep, pushing off the societal confines, and we'll talk about that more in our episode today, but it really is this idea of the insights come more prevalently with more time, patience, and perseverance. So that's number 6. You gain extensive insight, or you have extensive insight. Number 7 is navigation of life's ambiguity becomes easier. Quote, perhaps this is the perfect definition of wisdom, reasoning and cognition based on knowledge and experience. End quote. In other words, we are not born wise, but so long as we choose to be curious, continue to be lifelong learners, we begin to build it. Quote, wisdom is the ability to see the layers of light that were harder to see when one was younger. End quote. And consequently, we have the opportunity to hone our intuition as to how to best navigate our journey, even with the unknowns that are present. So number 7 is navigation of life's ambiguity becomes easier. Number 8, late bloomers can more easily determine what's important versus what's trivial. This is piggybacking on to the last point, number 7, which was all about ambiguity becoming something we're more comfortable with. Because we have acquired knowledge about the world over time and have made the conscious choice to continue to learn, we are then better able to discern patterns faster and jump to logical solutions more quickly. So number 8 is we are better able to determine the difference between importance versus trivial. Number 9, there is a desire to cut the apron strings with your parents. Quote, to fully bloom, we must declare our independence from our family. That does not mean we must reject their love. It means only that we must reach our own conclusions about what does and doesn't support our blooming. End quote. Creating a healthy culture in which to bloom is analogous to the proper soil and conditions for a plant to flourish. Each plant will need different types of soil, different amounts of sunshine and shade, varying temperatures, some wanting more extreme, some more moderate, and it all depends on that particular varietal of plant. Unlike the saying, bloom where you are planted, we should instead get out of the soil we have been planted in and explore to discover where we truly will thrive. So that's number 9. There is a desire as a late bloomer to cut the apron strings with your parents, and that's completely healthy and completely normal and should be explored. Number 10. Adult peer pressure is real, and if you've been feeling it and you've acknowledged it and you're aware of it, then you are a late bloomer. And if you feel it but you didn't know what it was, you might be realizing you are a late bloomer. Quote, some of this peer group influence can be healthy and positive, as when we join a hiking club or sign up for a program to quit smoking. But not every peer push leads us to a better version of ourselves. Not all communities support growth and positive change. End quote. To break free from our peer group, even when we don't know why it feels uncomfortable or wrong, but we know it does, is not easy. And it takes inner strength, great inner strength, to do so. However, it does become easier because we eventually begin to feel more in tune with our true selves, having let go of that pressure. We feel a burden lift. We feel our energy surge instead of feel depleted because we are no longer trying to be or do something that isn't truly in line with what we can offer the world. So number 10 is acknowledging that peer pressure, adult peer pressure, is real. Number 11, societal pressure to conform is limiting to our true potential. Quote, today's media also promote cultural, racial, or gender biases, either through stereotyping roles and behaviors or under or overrepresentation of minorities. And repeated exposure to media content can lead viewers to begin to accept media portrayals as representatives of reality, end quote. From the media's portrayal of how to socially engage, what dating should look like, what children should be doing at certain ages based on their gender, the values are repeatedly shared and included in endless amounts of media such as video games, movies, television, newspapers, magazines, books, and radio. And since this is a passive medium, unless we are critical thinkers questioning everything we receive, it is easy to accept what is applauded as normal and what we should adhere to regarding our life's journey. So not only are we getting peer pressure from adults, we're also getting this pressure from our media. And this is the crucial part of it. Sometimes we don't even realize we're getting this pressure. We can maybe at this very moment say, oh, I know this particular show or that particular da-da-da-da. But wait a second, I bet you there's a few more. And even I am regularly trying to assess this. And I know I haven't found them all. And part of this involves us turning things off, being more selective with what we surround ourselves with. It doesn't mean we have to turn everything off. It doesn't mean we have to stay uninformed. It just means being critical thinkers, asking why, looking behind the curtain. So many different things we can do. So that's number 11. Societal pressure to conform is limiting to our true potential. Number 12. Late bloomers have learned to let go of comparisons. Quote, mass media ask us to compare our body shape, sex life, marriage, house, car, family, and community to unattainable television versions of perfection. Social media ask us to compare our own commonplace or even boring reality against the curated accounts of how absolutely wonderful someone else's life is. People we know. End quote. When we stop comparing and start celebrating, we liberate ourselves and enable the opportunity to observe our own awesomeness without the outside world's closed-minded criticism or limited acceptance. The author of Late Bloomers shared something that I think is worth sharing here as a reminder that there are many paths to success, to reaching a goal, to attaining contentment. He writes, there are always many ways to achieve a goal, gain expertise, or find success. In sports or music, they are easy to see. But it's not as easy to see multiple paths for success in most endeavors, which leads to confusion. And as a result, we default to following norms and taking the road everyone else is taking. End quote. And these paths to success that we're talking about have as much to do with professional success as well as personal success. Your definition of a life of contentment, as I've said and shared many times before on this podcast, on the blog, and in my books, will most likely be very different than mine from anyone else listening to this particular podcast. But that doesn't mean we both or all of us cannot feel the contentment that is spoken about and written about that provides deep satisfaction and peace, doing what uniquely brings us to that contentment. It is important that we all recognize that each of us will bloom at a different time. So keep in mind this quote: each of us deserves the opportunity to bloom in our own way. Now, the second half of today's episode is all about the invaluable benefits that will come into your life should you embrace being a late bloomer. And I sure hope you do. I'll be right back, and I'd like to introduce you to today's sponsor. The Simple Sophisticate is brought to you by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community covering dozens of creative and entrepreneurial skills. You can take classes in everything from photography and creative writing to design, productivity, and more. So whether you're returning to a longtime passion project, challenging yourself to get outside your comfort zone, or simply exploring something new, Skillshare has classes for you. In fact, there's a class taught by Roxanne Gay called Creative Writing Classes, focusing on crafting personal essays with impact. There's also a lot of cooking classes, right up my alley. One, for example, how to make the French macaroons. Did I say that right? Probably not. You know what I'm talking about, those lovely bites of air. Oh my gosh. And if you're someone who likes coffee, there is a class about how to become a coffee connoisseur in 30 minutes. And if you know the cookbook author Julia Turshen, she's going to share with you the one yeast dough you need to know how to make. And there is one on productivity that caught my eye. It was called Productivity You Need to Know, a masterclass on how to customize a system that works. So many fantastic classes. And when you join, you're joining millions of students already learning on Skillshare today with a special offer just for listeners of the Simple Sophisticate. You can get 2 months free. That's right. Skillshare is offering the Simple Sophisticate listeners 2 months of unlimited access to thousands of classes for free. To sign up, go to Skillshare.com/simple. Again, that is Skillshare.com/simple to start your 2 months now. So since we're talking about late blooming and being curious, this kind of fits with it, I think. Visit Skillshare.com/simple and get and enjoy those 2 months for free. Now, as we get back into this topic of late bloomers, I want to just remind you that this is going to be a unique journey. Just because, one listener is 29 and the other listener is 59, all of us learn in different paces, in different steps. And as he talks about in this book, he does talk about science and the fact that our brains are still developing, that prefrontal cortex is still developing from our late teens to our mid-20s. But mid-20s to one person might be until they're 29. But for others, it might be a little earlier. We all, as we know, if you've been around kids, if you've been around people, we all develop at different stages. So the key here as you're listening is to be giving yourself a positive talk about just being supportive of where you are on this journey. And you are on your own journey at your own pace, and that's something to celebrate. With that said, I want to share the 8 invaluable benefits that you will find when you embrace being a late bloomer. Number 1, you begin to protect yourself and others when you encourage yourself to bloom in your own time, because then you're not being so critical to yourself or on yourself, and you don't drown in disappointment when things don't work out. So this doesn't mean to say that as a late bloomer, you're not going to face any obstacles or bumps along the way. Rather, it's saying, yeah, you're going to run into bumps along the way, but that's what it takes to understand where you want to go and why you want to go there. So that's number 1. You become more protective and thus more resilient. Number 2, you learn how to work with self-doubt, and as the author calls it, you let it become your superpower. You heard me right. Self-doubt becomes your superpower. Here's a quote. To bloom, we all must learn not to fear self-doubt, but to embrace it as a normally occurring opportunity for growth and improved performance. The key to harnessing self-doubt starts at the very core of our individual beliefs about ourselves. In other words, self-efficacy. Now, what is self-efficacy? That's number 3, because self-efficacy will actually become strengthened when you embrace being a late bloomer. Self-efficacy, spelled EFFICACY, in case you're curious. I know for me, I have to get the visual of the spelling in my brain, is an individual's confidence in their ability to accomplish what they set out to do. In other words, you, in your mind, know that you're going to be able to achieve something that may seem impossible, that may look like it's going to take a long time. But in the back of your mind, sitting in your unconscious, but also your conscious, it's got to be in your conscious mind as well, is this understanding that, okay, I may have moments of doubt, I might have moments of frustration, but I know that somehow, some way, it's going to happen. I may not know exactly how it's going to happen. I may not know exactly how it's going to look when it does happen, but I know that I can do this. So that's number 3, what self-efficacy is, and it becomes stronger if you are a late bloomer who continues to follow their curiosity. Number 4, obstacles begin to be seen as opportunities to grow rather than roadblocks. Quickly, a quote, while you may feel a general sense of self-doubt, you proceed anyway. Number 5, you begin to have an improved positive self-talk in your mind with yourself. The quote, positive self-talk can improve our performance by helping us regulate our emotions, thoughts, and energy. End quote. When we begin to see skill sets that render positive results, so we're practicing, for example, this idea of being resilient and we push through, or we're practicing this idea of self-efficacy, of knowing that even though it's tough, we're going to keep going. When you keep seeing positive results from doing that, so for example, positive self-talk leads you eventually to overcoming things because you're not dwelling on the negative, you're not wasting energy on the negative. You then start to strengthen all these other skills. Confidence, your self-efficacy is improved. You then begin to see your performance that you've been seeking improve. And you're like, oh, I'm going to keep doing these positive things. And positive self-talk becomes easier when positive results keep happening in your life. And so number 5 is improved positive self-talk, along with all these other skill sets we're talking about today. Number 6, you begin to build stronger, healthier relationships. When you begin to bloom and gravitate toward those who celebrate your blooming, and for those who initially are not celebratory of this change, it's advised to give them a moment to understand why your blooming makes them uncomfortable. Because depending upon that person, they may not realize that their discomfort with your growth is a reflection of their disappointment in what they feel they could have achieved but didn't. Now, some will take this as an opportunity and reflect, and then they'll shift. They'll shift and be supportive of you. Maybe you will have to have a conversation with them. Maybe not. Maybe someone else will. Maybe they'll have this conversation with themselves. And those are the people you want to continue to build relationships with, because you're growing together. And it could be any type of relationship. But for those that they just can't see what this is truly a reflection of, you may have to let them go. Because your growth, if they don't like it, is all about them. It has nothing to do with you. And it's important to recognize that. Now, with all of these skills that you begin to acquire, they will start leading you toward people, toward relationships that are healthier and less critical of these changes, because it's not their journey. And you start to build those relationships and have those conversations because you're with someone who wants to learn and grow as well. And so it's a learning curve that's very steep and uncomfortable initially, but it does get easier. And some may say, well, it doesn't necessarily get easier, just that you get better at the skills to navigate them. And that's probably true in many cases as well. So it just depends on the circumstance. Now, this also applies to not only improving healthy relationships with other people, but a healthier relationship with yourself. You begin to be more compassionate towards yourself. You begin to be less critical of yourself, and thus you start to see yourself rise a little bit more every single day. So that's number 6. Stronger and healthier relationships are a result. Number 7, excellence begins to arrive when you let your curiosity take over. Quote, when curiosity takes over, a sense of exploration also takes over. I get in the zone and I go for it. I feel pulled, not pushed, pulled by a beautiful power I cannot explain. End quote. I don't know what else to say to that. I think he wrote it beautifully. Well said. Very true. So that's number 7. Excellence will arrive when you let your curiosity take over. And last but not least, there are many benefits, by the way, in this book, if you choose to read it. And these are the 8 that I corralled and wrote down, but there are many, and different ones may speak to you more highly based on where you are in your journey. Number 8 is that the courage to repot when necessary is something that you can definitely do. Quote, when it comes to repotting, late bloomers have a distinct advantage over early bloomers. We're naturally curious and resilient. We're not afraid to follow a different path or break free of convention. We genuinely want to see what's around the corner or over the hill. These late bloomer strengths enable, even propel the change we need to find the right people and the right place to help us thrive. End quote. Once you have a clear understanding of who you are and what cultures and communities are best suited for you to bloom, you will have strengthened, as was mentioned above in the first list we talked about at the top of the podcast, an awesome skill set. This skill set will be your bedrock for being able to repot when and if it is necessary. Another quote to ponder: we need to give ourselves a break. We need to recognize and celebrate the fact that we're all different with different skill sets, developmental profiles, and backgrounds, and that each of us will forge a different path toward blooming. End quote. Being a late bloomer is most certainly something to celebrate. And when we, quote, change our story, we can change our behavior and even our life, end quote. I want to leave you with one lasting thought from the book that resonated powerfully with me. Here it is. If we're not forced to conform to standard timetables for success, we can and will bloom on our own schedules. And we can do it with a deeper sense of mission and a greater feeling of contentment. What we accomplish in the marathon of life depends on our persistence, our patience, and an ability to see ourselves as we really are. Our cultural obsession with youthful talent, with early achievement, distracts us from this simple truth. Our late bloomer power is different. It is the power to renounce what's supposed to happen in life and instead embrace what actually happens in life, with its ups and downs, twists and turns. It's the power to explore and experience, to be an individual. It's the power that comes with knowing and valuing ourselves. Again, the book is called Late Bloomers, The Power of Patience in a World Obsessed with Early Achievement by Rich Karlgaard. And I'll provide a link to it on the show notes. I'll also provide a handful of episodes and posts from the archives that you might be interested in that are similar in topic that I think you might enjoy. Now, we got to get to our petit plaisir. It's been too long, and I have a book I think you're going to enjoy. I will be right back. This week's petit plaisir is a book that I started reading at the end of March, and it took me maybe a week to get through it. I truly enjoyed it. And again, as it often has happened, a Simply Luxurious Life reader introduced me to Jennifer Robson's latest novel, The Gown, and I am very grateful that they recommended it. It recently came out this last December 2018, and it is a novel, but it's based on an actual historical event in Britain. So it's called The Gown, a Novel of the Royal Wedding, and it depicts the time period in 1947 London in which now Queen Elizabeth II was getting married, and a gown she would wear on her wedding day, designed by Norman Hartnell. The novel juxtaposes this 20th century moment in time with the granddaughter of one of the seamstresses living in Toronto in 2016. And the plot shares the journey of two women who, during the 1947, had the opportunity to work on Princess Elizabeth's gown and their lives leading up to and following this historic British event. Robson, who is known for her historical fiction novels that are set in either England or in France, was inspired for this particular novel, the plot, by a conversation she had with one of the actual seamstresses who did work on the gown many decades ago. And in fact, part of her interview with the seamstress is included in the appendix of the book. As a reader who enjoys learning as I'm reading, so I do like fiction, but there's got to be some meat in the story. Obviously, it needs to be well written, but I also want some depth, which is what good classic literature is. Now, I wouldn't say this is classic literature, but it's definitely a worthwhile fictional novel that you will devour quite quickly. I found The Gown intertwined seamlessly, pun intended, both the historical moment of the time as the world emerged from World War II and the personal journeys of each of the women during this time of history, offering an empowering insight into the social pressures and expectations of women, as well as the gift of true friendship and what we can provide those we love when we see a gift that they may not trust as unique or special. And it is with that friendship, that encouragement, that support, that's sincere, that enables those that we care about to thrive and reach their full potential. So again, the novel is called The Gown, a Novel of the Royal Wedding by Jennifer Robson, and I'll provide a link on the show notes. Simply visit thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast252, and you'll find a link to that novel. I've also included a link because I have a separate post that shares this review that I just shared. On that separate post, there's a link to it. No, don't worry, on the show notes to get to it. I've also shared a few other links. One is an excerpt, one is a article written by the author for Time magazine back in November that shares the actual history of making her gown, the wedding dress. And then I also shared a link from the royal website that shares 70 facts about the Queen's wedding, in case you are curious. So be sure to check that out. I hope you've enjoyed this week's Petit Plaisir, where each week ideas are shared to make the everyday all the more enjoyable. Tune in at the end of each Monday's podcast where I'll recommend a book, a film, or a recipe. Anything that is a simple pleasure to satiate your sophisticated taste. Now, before I wrap up today, I want to share a few reviews that listeners have shared on iTunes and extend my gratitude. This first one comes from Judy Flores, and she writes a title, "A New Admirer of the Simply Luxurious Life." Her handle, I love her handle, is called Lover of Simple Pleasures. Okay, we're definitely kindred spirits here, Judy. I love it. Here's her 5-star review. "Shannon, I accidentally stumbled upon your podcast a few months ago while searching podcasts for healthy living, and I have been binge listening ever since. You and your podcast have truly inspired me to, live a more luxurious life. You articulate so beautifully, and no matter what your topic, your words inspire me to live better. Since listening to your podcast, I truly feel lighter, brighter, and more confident. Thank you so much for all of the time and hard work you put into your shows. They are full of great suggestions and quality information. Sincerely, Judy Flores." Judy, thank you so much for your kind words, your thoughtful review, and for taking the time to share. I am so tickled that you are seeing this be reflected in your life, and just knowing that you're enjoying your life even more just makes me smile. So I know you can't see me smile, but I'm smiling right now. So thank you so much. The second review is from Becca, 1959, and she writes, "Love, love, love. I simply adore this podcast. I could listen all day long. Shannon is so easy to listen to. She doesn't talk down to you. She's a very real person that has to budget in order to purchase what she wants, like a hand mixer." Thank you very much, Becca. Your comment means a lot. I do appreciate that, and I do my best to let you know that I am making mistakes along the way too, but it's all a matter of remaining curious, as today's episode would say, and that I enjoy doing, and I know that listeners of this podcast do as well. Now, before I wrap up, I do just want to remind you that British Week is in full force on the blog. In case you are new to this podcast or the blog, you may not know that for the last 4 years, we have done a French week every August. For an entire week, I share 2 posts every single day, share some giveaways as well. There's some recipes that are shared, books that are shared, outfit ideas, historical ideas. Culture ideas, so many different things come together. And as I share in the first post of British Week, which went live yesterday, there was a deep interest for Britain. And I discovered this in 2017, and I've been pondering this idea of putting together a British Week, and I'm so happy that readers let me know what they're interested in, because that's what I want to bring. I want to bring something that listeners and readers enjoy, and we certainly have a common interest in being Francophiles, but we also, I think, more than I realized, have a common interest in being lovers of the British culture as well. In fact, as I was putting together one of my posts yesterday, I realized, oh my gosh, I've written more British inspired posts than I realized. So if you go to the archives and you go to British inspired, you'll see that there is more posts about Britain and my trips to Britain than I realized. So I've been doing that since 2011, unbeknownst to me. Should have done this a long time ago. Anyway, case in point, there are links to all of the posts that have been shared with regards to British Week on today's show notes if you would like to see a taste of what I'm talking about. And I do hope you stop by and take a look. With that, I hope you have a beautiful week, and thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, visit the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com, or pick up my new book, Living the Simply Luxurious Life, Making Your Everydays Extraordinary and Discovering Your Best Self. You can also pick up my first book, Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, A Modern Woman's Guide, which is available now in paperback, ebook, and audio versions on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes, or wherever books are sold. To stay caught up on the most recent episodes of the podcast, blog posts, my new cooking show, and receive exclusive news as well as an extra dose of inspiration to jumpstart your weekend, subscribe to the Simply Luxurious Life's weekly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox each Friday to enjoy with a hot cup of tea or a morning cup of coffee. Until next Monday, I'm your host, Shannon Ables. Bonne journée!